Something terrifying happened in 1977. 120 descendants of the man who controlled the rails and ports of an entire nation gathered at a university that bore his surname. The chilling fact is another one. Among those 120 people, direct heirs to the most formidable transportation empire in the United States, there was not a single millionaire. Zero. How does a fortune of that magnitude evaporate in 3 generations? It wasn't a war, nor a stock market crash, nor a natural disaster. It was something more silent, more patient, and for that very reason, more devastating. But before the bank accounts reflected nothing, the fortune began to disappear in another way, in bricks and marble. The first act of demolition wasn't financial, it was architectural. Imagine Fifth Avenue in New York at the end of the 19th century, a row of 10 palaces of limestone and marble, with ballrooms that dwarfed the opera houses. Each one belonged to a Vanderbilt. 100 years later, not one was still standing. The Big Apple swallowed them up to build office towers and apartment buildings. What the cranes demolished in Manhattan, the lack of visionary leadership had already consumed on the balance sheets. To understand the physics of this collapse, we need to return to the source of the original energy. The story begins with $100. In 1810, a 16-year-old boy named Cornelius Vanderbilt made a proposal to his mother. He asked to borrow $100 to buy a boat. It wasn't a gift, it was a loan, with conditions. The mother agreed, on the condition that he clear and plant an 8-acre field. Cornelius did it, and with that gesture of physical work for seed capital, the Commodore was born. Cornelius never saw money as an ornament. He saw it as a battering ram. During the following 6 decades, he applied a brutal strategy to dominate the sector, controlling routes, eliminating rivals, and taking advantage of the opportunities that each crisis brought. First, he strangled the maritime traffic of the Hudson River. Then, when the rails began to weave the American geography, he abandoned the boats and climbed aboard the train heading toward the future. He consolidated railroad lines, connecting Chicago to New York, and erecting a monument to his power, the Grand Central Depot. When he died in 1877, he had more than $80 million. He was the richest man in the United States. But what he did with that fortune in his will planted the seed of everything that would come later. Cornelius left most of it to a single son, William Henry Vanderbilt. They called him Billy. Why did he choose Billy and not another? What did the old Commodore see in that nervous and almost shy man whom he had so often underestimated? That last one we'll know in a few seconds. First, what Billy did with the inheritance. Billy Vanderbilt wasn't his father, but under his command, the fortune didn't stagnate. It doubled in less than a decade. By 1885, the year of his death, Billy had turned the legacy into more than $200 million. The last Vanderbilt who knew how to multiply a fortune was William Henry. After him, none ever did it again. The reason for that fracture hid in a single decision. Billy didn't follow his father's script. Cornelius had concentrated everything in one heir to keep the empire intact. Billy, on the other hand, divided the immense fortune among his sons. Command diluted into committees. Shares were distributed among separate branches, each with its own administration, its own ambitions, and its own idea of what it meant to be a Vanderbilt. Suddenly, the command of the empire was no longer in the hands of a warrior forced to fight to maintain the legacy, but in a board of heirs who had never had to earn a single dollar. What did those heirs do with such wealth? The answer became visible on Fifth Avenue. The family built 10 mansions, not houses, palaces. White limestone facades, ballrooms, marble staircases, each property competed with the previous one in scale and ostentation. They were monuments designed not to live in, but to prove that the family that had conquered America's railroads now conquered architecture as well. But the mansions produced no income. They consumed it. Each property required armies of servants, constant maintenance, and the payment of taxes on land that grew more expensive year after year in a Manhattan that never stopped rising. The Vanderbilts weren't investing in railroads, nor in transportation, nor in any industry that recalled the origin of the fortune. They were building temples to their own name, and every brick was a silent drain on the estate. By the 1920s, the mansions of Fifth Avenue began to fall. One by one, they were demolished. The land was worth more than the buildings, and the Vanderbilts could no longer sustain the cost of maintaining what they had built. The press christened it with a name that would remain etched: the fall of the House of Vanderbilt. This is where the great irony becomes visible. While Cornelius's grandchildren financed mansions, masquerade balls, and transatlantic voyages with the cash flow of the railroads, an invisible revolution was happening beneath their feet. Oil replaced coal, and the automobile replaced the locomotive. The Vanderbilts had the trained eye to maintain the tracks and the schedules, but not to buy refineries or to bet on the highways. They lacked the millimeter-sharp hunger of Cornelius, the one that made him spot a dying business before anyone else and buy it for pennies. Spending doesn't bankrupt a dynasty. Spending while your industry transforms without visionary leadership does devour it. The third generation didn't lose the fortune in casinos or in bacchanals. They lost it in boardrooms. They lost it in the brutal inability to react in time. The final wound came in the most human form possible: a trial. It wasn't a trial for murder or for corporate fraud. It was the intimate war over the custody of a little girl in 1934. The little Gloria Vanderbilt, heir of the branch of Cornelius Vanderbilt II, was caught in a legal battle between her mother, the glamorous Gloria Morgan, and her aunt, the sculptor and philanthropist Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney. The press called it the trial of the century. Day after day, the newspapers aired the family's finances, weaknesses, and accounts as if it were a Broadway show. A New York court awarded custody to Aunt Gertrude, but the symbolic damage was already done. The Vanderbilt name had ceased to be synonymous with industrial power, to become synonymous with romance novel and passive scandal. Decades later, the name resurfaced on another screen. Anderson Cooper, descendant of the family, became a journalist. His success didn't come from a rail empire. It came from his own talent in front of the cameras. The shine was still there, but it was the shine of celebrity, not of hard power. The Great Depression didn't bring down the Vanderbilts. The lack of a new Cornelius, a new turn of the helm, did. In 1977, Vanderbilt University organized that family reunion. 120 descendants attended. The question hanging in the air didn't need to be asked: how much was left? The answer was simple. None of those present were millionaires. His son Billy doubled it. His grandchildren divided it. His great-grandchildren spent it. And his great-great-grandchildren forgot it. What evaporates isn't the millions. What evaporates is the knowledge of how they were made.